Keanu Reeves, one of Hollywood's most beloved stars, made an unforgettable impression when he entered the upscale Lumiere restaurant, located in the heart of Beverly Hills. However, what set his appearance apart was the simplicity with which he entered the restaurant, something that contrasted starkly with the usual glitz and glamour of this renowned establishment. Keanu walked in dressed in worn jeans and a simple shirt, looking like someone who had just come from an ordinary day, without any effort to stand out or flaunt wealth. Unlike the usual clientele of Lumiere, who were often dressed in the finest designer clothes, Keanu's understated outfit made him blend into the background, a man who seemed to care little for appearances. Lumiere, known for its luxurious ambiance, was a place where wealth and status were almost tangible. Every aspect of the restaurant screamed exclusivity. From its sparkling crystal chandeliers to the elegant furniture and refined table settings, the restaurant was not just a place to eat, it was a destination, a space where the rich and famous could not only enjoy exquisite meals, but also be seen, admired, and celebrated. The patrons who frequented Lumiere often did so to be part of an elite circle, a social scene where status was a key component of the experience. For many, a visit to Lumiere was more about showcasing their wealth and prestige than it was about the food. However, Keanu's entrance disrupted this unspoken order. His quiet, unassuming presence immediately stood out in a place where people were more accustomed to the loud presence of wealth. Despite his fame as one of Hollywood's biggest stars, Keanu chose to remain humble and unnoticed, not desiring the attention that usually accompanied his name. This was a stark contrast to the flashy personalities who typically frequented the upscale venue, where luxury brands and expensive accessories were the norm. As Keanu made his way toward the reception desk, the staff, especially Ashley, a seasoned waitress, quickly assessed him. Ashley, who took great pride in her job at one of the most prestigious restaurants in Beverly Hills, was used to dealing with high-profile guests, but Keanu, with his plain clothes and humble demeanor, did not fit the mold of the typical Lumiere patron. Without much thought, Ashley judged him based on his appearance, failing to recognize the man for who he truly was. Her judgment was immediate, and the condescending attitude she displayed was evident from the moment she greeted him. Keanu, however, remained calm and composed, responding politely when he requested a table. His demeanor never wavered, even as Ashley's dismissive attitude became more apparent. He did not respond to her sarcasm or let her attempt at humiliation affect him. This quiet confidence and grace in the face of such treatment spoke volumes about his character. Despite the judgment he faced from someone in a position of authority, Keanu stayed true to himself, exemplifying humility and patience. His presence at Lumiere, understated as it was a reminder that true worth lies not in appearances, but in how we carry ourselves, no matter the circumstances. Lumiere Restaurant, nestled in the heart of Beverly Hills, was a symbol of sophistication and exclusivity, attracting only the wealthiest and most influential clientele. Known for its impeccable service and luxurious setting, Lumiere wasn't just a dining establishment. It was an experience. From the moment guests walked through its grand doors, they were enveloped in an atmosphere of opulence. The restaurant was carefully designed to create an environment where elegance and prestige were evident in every detail. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the room, while velvet upholstered chairs and polished wooden tables provided a sense of comfort amidst the grandeur. The lighting was soft and inviting, emphasizing the beauty of the exquisite decor and creating a relaxed yet refined ambiance. But it wasn't just the aesthetics that made Lumiere stand out. It was the culture that permeated the space. Dining at Lumiere was as much about being seen as it was about the food itself. For many of its patrons, a visit to the restaurant wasn't simply about enjoying a meal. It was a chance to flaunt their wealth, their social status, and their taste for the finer things in life. The restaurant catered to a clientele that was used to being treated with the utmost respect and receiving top-tier service. Every detail, from the quality of the ingredients to the presentation of each dish, was designed to impress and reflect the high standards of the establishment. The staff at Lumiere, including its most experienced waitresses, took great pride in serving guests. It was a privilege to work at such a prestigious location, and the employees were trained to embody professionalism and grace. For Ashley, one of Lumiere's top waitresses, the restaurant's reputation was a source of pride. She believed that working at Lumiere was a testament to her skill and expertise. She carried herself with confidence, always impeccably dressed and poised, ready to serve high-profile guests. Ashley was well-versed in reading people, quickly making judgments based on their appearance and behavior. She often saw herself as a gatekeeper of sorts, ensuring that only those deemed worthy could enjoy the experience Lumiere offered. The restaurant's clientele, in Ashley's eyes, were divided into categories: those who truly belonged, based on their appearance, status, and social standing, and those who didn't. Ashley's ability to judge people based on superficial traits allowed her to navigate the dining room with a sense of control, but it also led her to form preconceived notions about the people she served. In her eyes, the perfect customer was someone who fit the typical profile of a high-status, well-dressed individual who could blend seamlessly into the luxury of the restaurant. To her, anyone who didn't fit this mold was out of place and not worthy of the experience Lumiere promised. However, this culture of exclusivity and judgment would soon be challenged in a way that neither Ashley nor the rest of the staff could have anticipated. Keanu Reeves, with his unassuming appearance, would prove to be a reminder that worth and dignity are not defined by outward appearances or material wealth. His presence at Lumiere, though seemingly ordinary, would reveal the true nature of the establishment and its staff, forcing a confrontation with the assumptions and biases that lay beneath the surface. Ashley, one of the seasoned waitresses at Lumiere Restaurant, was not only an experienced staff member, but also someone who held a deep sense of pride in her role. To her, working at such a prestigious and high-end restaurant was not just a job. It was a symbol of her skill and professionalism. Lumiere was known for its exclusivity, catering to the elite of Beverly Hills, and Ashley's position there reinforced her sense of importance. The way she carried herself, with impeccable grooming and a practiced smile, reflected this belief. To her, Lumiere wasn't just a place to work. It was a place where she was recognized and valued for her expertise. However, her sense of pride often crossed into a form of arrogance. Ashley, like many people in high-status positions, had developed a knack for quickly judging others, often based on superficial factors like their appearance or clothing. She believed that her role at Lumiere gave her the authority to categorize people, mentally placing them in boxes based on their wealth, status, and overall demeanor. This instinctive judgment became a part of her everyday life, both at work and outside of it. She could tell almost instantly who belonged at Lumiere and who did not. And for Ashley, the most important thing was to maintain the restaurant's image, to ensure that only those who seemed to match the elite standards of Lumiere could be part of its inner circle. Ashley's judgments were quick and harsh, often based on first impressions. She didn't always take the time to understand the deeper stories behind a person's appearance or the reasons they were there. To her, it was all about how a person looked and what their outward demeanor suggested about their social standing. People who wore expensive clothes, drove high-end cars, and exuded an aura of wealth were, in Ashley's mind, the rightful guests of Lumiere. On the other hand, anyone who didn't fit that mold was immediately viewed with suspicion or disdain. These individuals, in her eyes, were not quite worthy of the prestige that came with dining at Lumiere. This mindset was put to the test when Keanu Reeves walked into the restaurant. Despite being one of Hollywood's most beloved and respected actors, Keanu was dressed in a simple, understated outfit. His jeans were worn, his shirt slightly wrinkled, and his entire appearance gave off the impression of someone who had just stepped out of a regular day's work. He didn't try to dress up to fit the luxurious environment of Lumiere, nor did he try to draw attention to himself. In fact, he made an effort to blend in, to remain inconspicuous in a space that was otherwise filled with people wearing designer outfits and expensive accessories. For Ashley, this was immediately an issue. She could not understand why someone who looked so out of place would come to a high-end restaurant like Lumiere. She couldn't fathom why someone would step into a space that, in her mind, was reserved for the affluent, for those who deserved to be there. Keanu's appearance, so different from the usual clientele, raised a red flag in her mind. Without considering the possibility that Keanu might be there for reasons beyond the surface, Ashley quickly judged him. She assumed that he either didn't belong or wouldn't be able to afford the experience. Her first reaction was to make a dismissive comment, questioning whether Keanu could afford to dine at such an exclusive restaurant. Her tone was full of sarcasm, and her expression mirrored the disdain she felt. For Ashley, his humble appearance was an immediate sign that he was out of place, and she wasn't afraid to let him know that. She was so wrapped up in maintaining the restaurant's image of exclusivity that she failed to realize she was making a judgment based on nothing but superficial factors. The very notion that someone like Keanu could not belong in a restaurant like Lumiere simply because of his appearance blindsided her to the deeper truth. What Ashley didn't know, and what would later be revealed, was that Keanu's appearance was, in fact, just a small piece of a much bigger picture. Keanu Reeves, despite his fame, was not someone who flaunted his wealth or his status. He had always been known for his humble and down-to-earth demeanor, both in public and in private. His lack of ostentation was not a reflection of his worth. It was a reflection of his character. Keanu didn't need to wear expensive clothes or display his wealth to be comfortable in any space, even a high-end restaurant like Lumiere. And yet, Ashley's judgment clouded her perception, and she failed to see this important aspect of his identity. As she escorted Keanu to his table, Ashley's attitude remained condescending. She didn't just direct him to any seat. She took him to the farthest, least appealing corner of the restaurant. Her actions were deliberate, and her tone was cold as she told him that this corner table was perfect for him. The entire experience felt like an attempt to belittle Keanu and make him feel out of place. Yet, despite her attempts to provoke a reaction, Keanu remained calm, and unbothered. He showed no sign of frustration or discomfort, which only seemed to aggravate Ashley further. Throughout the evening, Ashley's behavior grew increasingly unprofessional as she continued to treat Keanu with disdain. Her actions were fueled by her own biases and the belief that people like Keanu, those who didn't meet her narrow definition of appropriate customers, didn't deserve the same level of respect or service as the typical Lumiere patrons. But Keanu, despite everything, never lost his cool. His unwavering calmness, his ability to stay composed in the face of Ashley's attempts to provoke him, was both a testament to his strength of character and a clear message that appearances and judgments didn't matter. This interaction between Ashley and Keanu was not just a simple case of poor service. It was a moment that exposed the underlying prejudices that existed in Lumiere, as well as in Ashley herself. It was a moment that would challenge Ashley's assumptions about people and about what truly defines someone's worth. And as the evening unfolded, it would become clear that this experience would lead to significant lessons, not just for Ashley, but for everyone in the restaurant. As the evening progressed, the tension between Ashley and Keanu was on the menu. Ashley stifled a laugh, clearly taken aback. She almost mocked him, pointing out the high price of the dish, with a tone that suggested he might not know what he was ordering. She even made a pointed remark about the minimum tip expected, as if to imply that someone like him might not be able to meet the standards of Lumiere's service expectations. But still, Keanu remained calm. He thanked her politely for the suggestion, and his demeanor never shifted from the peaceful, almost zen-like composure he had shown since arriving. For Ashley, this was both infuriating and perplexing. She had hoped that by highlighting the cost of the meal and by making these pointed remarks, she could get some reaction, perhaps a defensive or uncomfortable response. But Keanu simply didn't give her the satisfaction. It was almost as if he didn't care about the perceived status of the restaurant or the role that money and appearances played in the way people were treated. Keanu's refusal to engage with Ashley's provocations became more apparent when she returned to check on him after his main course arrived. She again tried to belittle him, insinuating that the sophisticated dish he ordered might be too complex for someone like him to truly appreciate. But once again, Keanu's calm and gracious response confounded her. He didn't argue or get upset. He simply thanked her and assured her that he was enjoying the meal. His ability to maintain this composed and respectful demeanor in the face of such poor service was disarming, and it left Ashley struggling to find the satisfaction she had hoped for. However, despite her attempts to provoke him, Keanu's serene manner began to have a ripple effect on those around him. The elderly couple, who had been observing the interaction from across the room, was particularly moved by Keanu's poise. They had seen the way Ashley treated him, and they were clearly uncomfortable with the situation. After seeing Keanu calmly handle Ashley's rude behavior, the elderly man raised his glass and silently toasted in Keanu's direction, offering him a respectful nod. Keanu, ever the gracious person, returned the gesture with a slight nod and a smile, acknowledging the support without making a fuss. This subtle exchange didn't go unnoticed by the other diners, who began to murmur among themselves, growing increasingly uncomfortable with Ashley's behavior. It was becoming clear to the other patrons that something was not right, and many began to feel sympathy for Keanu. They saw through Ashley's attempts to belittle him and recognized the quiet strength and dignity he was displaying. What was even more striking was that Keanu wasn't seeking attention, or trying to make a statement. He was simply being himself, maintaining his composure, and treating everyone around him with respect. He wasn't letting the petty judgments of one person or the negative atmosphere she was trying to create affect his experience. This made him stand out even more, as it was so rare to see someone handle such a situation with such grace. Despite Ashley's escalating behavior, it was clear that her attempts to humiliate Keanu had only backfired. The more she tried to provoke him, the more she exposed her own lack of professionalism and empathy. Her actions were causing discomfort not just for Keanu, but for the other diners as well. The couple who had been observing her behavior were disgusted by the way Ashley had treated him, and they were not alone. The elderly man who had spoken to Keanu earlier could be seen shaking his head in disapproval, clearly troubled by Ashley's unprofessional conduct. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted, and it was no longer just about the food or the luxury of the surroundings. It had become about something deeper: respect, fairness, and kindness. As the evening wore on, it became clear that Keanu had already made an impact. His ability to stay composed and treat everyone around him with kindness, even in the face of adversity, had shown the other diners what true class looked like. And while Ashley may have thought she was in control, the power dynamic had shifted. Keanu had subtly but effectively taken the reins, not through confrontation or anger, but through the quiet strength of his character. It was a lesson in grace under pressure, and it was one that not only Ashley, but also the entire restaurant would have to learn from. As the evening progressed, Ashley's attempts to provoke Keanu Reeves only seemed to escalate, yet Keanu remained steadfast in his calm demeanor, undeterred by her efforts to unsettle him. Despite her increasingly rude and dismissive behavior, he continued to respond with nothing but politeness and grace. Ashley, frustrated by the lack of reaction, grew more determined to get some form of response from him. She had expected Keanu, as a simple diner dressed in unassuming clothes, to either express discomfort or perhaps even leave in a huff. Instead, Keanu did the opposite. He seemed entirely at ease, unaffected by her comments and actions, which left Ashley struggling to make sense of the situation. Her initial attitude toward him, based on assumptions about his worthiness to dine in such an exclusive restaurant, seemed to backfire completely. Keanu's refusal to engage in the typical confrontation she was used to seeing from customers who felt slighted only made the situation more uncomfortable for Ashley. She was caught in a dilemma. Here was a man who, despite being treated unfairly, was not allowing his dignity to be compromised. He wasn't rattled, and he wasn't about to let her prejudices take away his peace. To Ashley, this was entirely baffling. It was as though Keanu was silently challenging the very system she believed in, one based on superficial judgments of status and appearance. Keanu's ability to remain calm, even when subjected to Ashley's passive-aggressive comments and her deliberate attempts to make him feel out of place, made it clear that he wasn't driven by external validation. He wasn't concerned about how others perceived him, and certainly not about the judgments Ashley had made about his appearance. His actions spoke volumes about his character. Where most people would have fought back or become frustrated with such treatment, Keanu took a different approach. He chose not to let the behavior of others define his experience. In doing so, he inadvertently taught a lesson to everyone around him about the true meaning of self-respect and personal dignity. Throughout the evening, it became increasingly evident that Ashley was on a path that could only lead to discomfort and self-reflection. Her repeated attempts to humiliate Keanu, to make him feel like an outsider, had the opposite effect. Rather than causing Keanu to feel uncomfortable, her actions instead began to draw the attention of other diners. The other patrons, who had initially been caught up in their own conversations and meals, began to notice the unfolding drama. They could see how Keanu was being treated, and they weren't blind to Ashley's condescending attitude. It wasn't long before they started to feel uneasy about what was happening. What had started as an isolated interaction between Keanu and Ashley became a point of discomfort for the entire room. A particularly telling moment came when an elderly couple who had been watching the situation unfold made their quiet disapproval known. They raised their glasses and silently toasted in Keanu's direction, a small but significant gesture of solidarity. Keanu, ever gracious, returned the gesture with a slight nod and a smile, acknowledging their support without drawing attention to it. This small act of kindness caught the attention of the other diners, who were now beginning to feel a sense of empathy for Keanu and discomfort toward Ashley's behavior. The contrast between Ashley's dismissive attitude and Keanu's dignified response was stark. While Ashley continued to behave in a way that could only be described as unprofessional and discriminatory, Keanu's composed demeanor served as a powerful reminder to the other patrons of what it meant to treat others with respect, regardless of their appearance. His quiet strength became a point of reflection for everyone watching. In contrast, Ashley's actions only highlighted her lack of empathy and her failure to see beyond superficial judgments. By the time Keanu's main course arrived, the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted. The other diners, who had been quietly observing the interaction, began to exchange murmurs of disapproval about how Keanu had been treated. Their discomfort was palpable, and some even began to sympathize with Keanu's calm and graceful handling of the situation. Keanu's refusal to engage with Ashley's provocations not only made him stand out, but also put the spotlight on the inappropriate behavior of the staff. Keanu's actions were not just about maintaining his own composure. His behavior also indirectly forced a confrontation with the restaurant's culture of elitism. He wasn't the type to flaunt his wealth, and he didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Instead, he remained quietly confident, emphasizing the importance of respecting others regardless of their outward appearance. His ability to stay calm and humble in the face of such mistreatment was a lesson that Ashley and the rest of the staff would have to learn the hard way. As the evening came to a close, it was clear that Keanu's conduct had made a lasting impression on the other diners. They had witnessed firsthand the stark contrast between his peaceful demeanor and Ashley's increasingly uncomfortable behavior. His example was a reminder of the value of kindness, humility, and respect, regardless of how someone might look on the outside. As for Ashley, her attitude had not only caused discomfort for Keanu, but had also put her own professionalism and character into question. It was only a matter of time before she would have to face the consequences of her actions. As the evening drew to a close, the atmosphere in Lumiere restaurant had transformed dramatically. What had started as an ordinary night of dining quickly became a lesson in dignity, respect, and humility, all thanks to one individual, Keanu Reeves. His composed and graceful handling of the mistreatment he endured from Ashley, the waitress, had not only caused discomfort within the restaurant, but had also inspired a profound shift in the behavior of those around him. While Ashley's behavior had drawn the ire of her fellow staff members and some of the other patrons, Keanu's quiet confidence and unwavering politeness stood in stark contrast to her growing hostility, exposing the deep flaws in her approach and forcing a broader conversation about how people should treat one another. For Ashley, the realization came too late. She had spent the entire evening attempting to humiliate Keanu, judging him based solely on his appearance and making snide remarks about his worthiness to be in such an exclusive restaurant. Her actions had been calculated, meant to make him feel small and out of place. However, instead of breaking him down, Keanu's calm demeanor only seemed to highlight her own shortcomings, her constant need to belittle him, to point out the price of his meal, and the so-called inappropriateness of his presence in Lumiere only revealed her deep biases and lack of empathy. Keanu's behavior, in contrast, was a shining example of how to maintain grace under pressure. Despite the discomfort and condescension he faced, Keanu never lost his temper. His composure was not born out of arrogance, but from a deep understanding of self-respect and the belief that every person deserves to be treated with kindness, no matter their background or appearance. This was a lesson that Ashley, unfortunately, had not yet learned. Her actions were driven by assumptions and judgments based solely on surface-level observations, rather than recognizing the humanity in every person she encountered. As the situation unfolded, it was clear that the other patrons had begun to notice what was happening. The couple, who had been observing from across the room, grew visibly uncomfortable with Ashley's behavior and, in a quiet show of solidarity, raised their glasses to Keanu. This small gesture, though subtle, was a sign of support for Keanu, who had been subjected to mistreatment for no reason other than the fact that he didn't fit Ashley's preconceived notion of who deserved to be there. Keanu, ever gracious, returned the gesture with a slight nod and a smile, acknowledging the silent act of kindness. This moment, though understated, spoke volumes about Keanu's character and how, even in the face of adversity, he was able to remain dignified and humble. While Ashley may have thought she was in control of the situation, the power dynamic was slowly shifting. The more she attempted to undermine Keanu, the more the other diners began to see her for what she truly was, someone who lacked empathy and whose behavior was rooted in judgment and exclusion. Keanu, on the other hand, had become a quiet force of change within the restaurant. His refusal to engage in Ashley's provocations and his ability to maintain composure despite her attempts to humiliate him had earned him the respect of the other patrons. His actions spoke louder than any words could, and soon enough, it became apparent that the other diners were not just passively observing the situation. They were becoming actively involved, forming opinions about the way both Keanu and Ashley were handling the interaction. At the same time, the manager of the restaurant, who had been oblivious to the treatment Keanu was receiving, began to notice the growing tension. The murmurs from the patrons and the evident discomfort in the air made it clear that something had gone wrong. It was at this moment that the manager, realizing the situation was spiraling, decided to intervene. He approached Keanu with respect and professionalism, offering an apology for the delay and making it clear that Keanu was a valued guest. This moment of intervention, however, was not just about Keanu. It was also a wake-up call for Ashley. The manager's respect for Keanu, despite his unassuming appearance, was a direct contrast to Ashley's dismissive behavior. As the manager spoke to Keanu, He seemed to recognize that the issue at hand was not just poor service, but something much deeper. Keanu, with his usual calm demeanor, didn't seem to want to escalate the situation, but he did make it clear that the way people are treated should not depend on their outward appearance. In a quiet yet firm manner, he addressed the manager and reminded him that every guest, regardless of how they looked, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. This simple yet powerful message was a turning point in the evening, and for Ashley, it was a moment of self-realization. She could no longer hide behind her prejudices or her role as a waitress. The truth had come to light. Her behavior had been unacceptable, and it had cost her the respect of both her colleagues and the patrons. Keanu's influence on the restaurant, however, didn't stop there. After the manager took control of the situation and apologized to Keanu, the staff and diners were left to reflect on what had transpired. Keanu's example had shown them that true strength lies in humility and kindness, not in the arrogance of judgment. His refusal to react to Ashley's provocation had exposed the flaws in the way the restaurant, and perhaps society at large, valued people based on superficial markers of status. By the end of the evening, it was clear that Keanu had not only maintained his dignity, but had also inspired those around him to reconsider their own biases and attitudes. Ashley's actions had been an opportunity for growth, not just for herself, but for the entire restaurant staff. The lessons learned that night were clear. Kindness, respect, and empathy should always take precedence over judgment, no matter where we are or who we are with. Keanu had shown everyone that true strength doesn't come from appearances or wealth. It comes from how we treat others, especially when they don't conform to the norms we've created.